Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. And for our speakers and participants joining us from Africa, a very good morning to you. My name is Winnie from the Africa, Europe, Middle East, and Central and South Asia Department of SPF. And I will be your MC for our Festival Africa Edition webinar today on the future of African energy, oil and gas, and beyond. Festival is an initiative under the Global Connect at SBF program aimed at helping Singapore companies learn more about the opportunities and business environments in overseas markets so that they might land with business deals and or investment projects and eventually localize in their markets of interest with a well-grounded and sustainable business presence for long-term growth. Before I begin, please allow me to acknowledge the support of our partners and speaking organizations, Enterprise Singapore, Convera, Amena Africa, Mendi Energy Resources, Quim Energy SA, and Siemens Energy. Our webinar today would not be possible without their strong and invaluable support. Now, just a quick reminder on some courtesy points and house rules. Please keep your microphones on mute so that the webinar will not be disrupted. If you have any questions during the presentation, you can type them into the Q&A box in Zoom throughout the duration of the webinar. We will try our best to have your questions answered during the panel and Q&A segments of the webinar. We also seek your understanding and help in respecting our speakers and their generosity in sharing with you their insights. Our webinar today is entitled The Future of African Energy, Oil and Gas, and Beyond. It is aimed at helping Singapore companies better understand e-commerce potential in the African continent and how Singapore companies would consider leveraging oil and gas as a way to bring their services to African industries and the sector. For this purpose, we have invited industry experts from Amena Africa, a pan-African market advisory firm with offices in Kenya, Ghana, Nigeria, and South Africa to support its clients from the conception of their expansion plan to achieving their market entry and beyond. Its expertise spans across various industries, including energy and oil and gas. Mendi Energy Resources, a pan-African renewable energy development company. Mendi Energy Resources facilitates and develops power generation projects and works in collaboration with financial and technology partners to develop large-scale off-grid and grid-connected renewable energy power plants in Africa. Quim Energy SA, an Angola-based company offering engineering, procurement, and construction, as well as the development and management of structural projects with solutions targeted at the oil and gas, renewable energies, and mining sectors. Siemens Energy, a global MNC offering products, solutions, and services across the entire value chain. Its products include all gas turbines, steam turbines, generators, transformers, and compressors for transmission grids, power and heat generation, as well as other technologies for renewable energy power generation. To share with us their knowledge, insights, and we'll start off with a presentation on the oil and gas and energy transition landscape in Africa by Ms. Joyce Aporera, Regional Manager for West Africa from Amena Africa, which will be followed by a panel discussion joined by business leaders from Mendi Energy Resources and Siemens Energy. Before we go into our program proper, just a quick introduction to Global Connect at SBF. As briefly mentioned earlier, Global Connect at SBF is an initiative aimed at assisting Singapore companies looking to internationalize and deepen their presence in overseas markets. It assists by partnering with Singapore companies on their internationalization journey through 3 pillars of learn, land, and localize. Global Connect at SBF assists by helping Singapore companies learn about markets and overseas business opportunities. We do this by, for example, sharing useful resources such as curated market information, free trade agreement advisory, structured training through workshops, and not to mention webinars such as the one that you're attending today. We also organize business missions and learning journeys where Singapore companies can experience and appreciate the local business and operating environments of overseas markets. Global Connect at SBF also aims to help Singapore companies land in overseas markets with business deals and investment projects through our platforms for B2B matching, market advisors, and 3 Singapore Enterprise Centers currently operating in Jakarta, Indonesia, Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam, and Bangkok, Thailand. Global Connect at SBF also seeks to help more Singapore companies to localize by deepening their presence in markets they have entered, leveraging trusted relationships abroad, and achieving sustainable long-term growth in their markets of interest. So we now have an audience poll. So if you're interested to get in touch with us on Africa and the various assistance available, please indicate yes to the questions for the poll. And you can also contact us via Global Connect at SBF's email shown on the slide. So thank you. Without further ado, please allow me to invite Ms. Joyce Abuera, Regional Manager, West Africa of MENA Africa, to kick off our program for today with her presentation on the future of African energy. Joyce, please.
My name is Joyce Abuera, the Regional Manager, West Africa for MENA Africa. We are management consulting firm and market and business advisory firm providing services for companies across the continent. We are in 4 locations with access to 19 different African countries, from which we are able to provide support services to companies interested in the oil and gas and other sectors here in Africa. This presentation is basically to provide information about oil and gas opportunities, and then the future of the hydrocarbons as well as renewable energy in Africa, and then the trends to look out for. Africa's energy demands far outstrips its supply in terms of energy for transports, energy for petrochemicals, energies to produce or to keep industries running. And the influx of different events has made it imperative for Africa to industrialize using its readily available resources. The European situation and then the energy crisis happening in Europe is giving Africa the opportunity to get itself poised as the next point of supply when it comes to energy as well as oil and gas in the world settings. So here you understand more about what Africa has to offer. Africa's energy demand is tipped to increase by 30% in 2040, with investments increasingly coming in for gas and other LNG projects. So with a rapidly growth and industrialization expected, we are seeing a growth growing demand for energy across the continent. Looking at the last 5 years or 10 years, we are seeing more of contracts as well as services coming in, especially for the oil and gas sector, dedicated towards EPCI projects, mostly. On your left of this presentation, you see that from 2012 all the way to 2025, we are seeing more of oil and gas majors as well as players on the continent increasing their investments across the services industry. So you see we have the well services, drilling, and then EPCI. The services industry was a 60 billion plus industry in 2014, but then due to COVID and then some other market forces as well as oil prices on the world stage, we are having the industry to be estimated around 33 billion as of 2022. So in post-COVID times, it is expected that the services industry will go towards 43 billion in the next 5 years, with the EPCI segment looking to show significant growth in the back of LNG project construction and awards. So this presentation or this slide will give you more information about what the oil and gas industry has to offer. Now, I bet a lot of you are here to understand more about what are the trends and then what's the future outlook of the Africa's energy and then oil and gas industry has to offer. We are seeing more of the majors divesting their current crude oil assets in Africa. And with this current trend, we are having more of national oil companies and then international national oil companies buying into these oil and gas assets that have been divested by the majors. For instance, Shell PLC in Nigeria is looking to divest 19 of its oil mining leases. And with this, we are having more of local and lesser known companies looking to bid for these oil mining leases. One key company being FAMFA, and then we have Sahara Group, amongst others, looking to bid for some of these oil assets that oil wants to put on the market. And another trend that we see is more of European majors tapping into the global markets through the production of LNG in Africa. The trend is moving towards providing profits through sustainability. Giving you the example of Shell with a lot of legal actions being taken or taken against them in terms of the oil spills in the Delta states, as well as a whole lot of issues that they have encountered. Stakeholders, as well as more or less looking at the future trend of the energy industry, they felt it will be expedient for them to tap into new carbon neutral trends and then opportunities on the market. So you find a lot of them moving into investments in the LNG sector in Africa. Well, Amina Africa is of the opinion that yes, moving into the new carbon neutral or net zero portion of the production of the energy or oil and gas in Africa is good, but then Africa is not yet ready to leapfrog to the renewable energy yet, and that it will take a ready mix of clean energy as well as other energy needs to be able to, energy sources to be able to meet its energy needs. So here, we are expecting gas to become that transitory feedstock that will pave the way to Africa's clean tech ambitions. Then we also see a growing reluctance of European and then other development finance institutions to fund fossil fuels projects in Africa. And with this, we see African exploratory and production companies moving or looking towards Asia for financing and then cheaper finance rates to be able to finance their projects here on the continent. Then when you look at the infrastructure for the oil and gas industry here on the continent, it is more of extraction. In the outlook or in terms of the future trends, we are thinking more of oil and gas countries as well as major players to invest more in the refining, processing, and then transmission aspect of the oil and gas industry in Africa. Key point being for the oil, for gas production on the continent, because that is one area that has lacked serious investment over the years in this sector. Also, another point in terms of the trend would be of what local content upscaling for the development of the oil and gas industry. And then this is one of the key areas that a lot of governments in Africa with oil and gas assets are looking to provide for their countries. Now we are looking at the future of Africa's energy landscape. How is it going to look like? Yes, we are talking about net zero and then making sure that every production or any company that is undertaking anything major is able to reduce their carbon footprints in their areas of operation. But then you also see that when it comes to Africa, Africa is one of those regions that are being impacted by changing climate change disorders. We have a number of when it comes to drought and the like, Africa is usually affected, and livelihoods and the like are also affected through this. So the continent, in terms of its cumulative contribution to greenhouse emissions and the like, they have less than 6% of the global energy consumption and then 2% of cumulative global emissions. Africa, of nearly 2 billion inhabitants, has about 46% of its population currently having access to electricity, with over 500 million of this number without access to electricity. So as I already mentioned, the energy demand in Africa is huge. Then conventional fuels still account for 75% of Africa's power generation, with a large percentage of this, of a number of people still relying on biomass for their energy needs. Then Africa is bedeviled with the perceived risk and the high cost of energy project financing, which makes it very difficult for a number of projects to be undertaken on the continent. So what do we see to be the future of energy, African energy here? We see Africa being a potential to play a leading role as the world's energy systems transition to a net zero future. With this end, we are thinking more of the continent being the powerhouse for certain rare clean tech earth, like cobalt for rechargeable batteries. And then when you look around the continent, we have a huge potential for solar and wind power, with solar energy leading this point. Here you find that on the continent, as at 2020, we had about 9,000 megawatts of solar energy being installed on the continent. Then looking at it in terms of the future, Africa oil and gas countries will need to decarbonize and then improve their cost efficiencies in terms of their existing resource bases, and increase their energy supply through lower carbon infrastructure projects, as well as invest in renewables. So we see more of oil and gas countries in Africa undertaking this step in the next 10 to 20 years. Then, as I already mentioned, leapfrogging to a net zero future is not something that is going to become, or it's not going to be undertaken using a magic bullet. It's going to take a while, and gas is tipped to be that transitory clean tech feedstock that will be able to power Africa's energy needs. And this is more in line with gas to energy projects being undertaken across the continent. So in terms of which countries to look out and then which opportunities they have to offer, we are thinking more of certain giants such as Nigeria, which is an OPEC member. And this current slide will give you information about their current crude reserves, as well as for gas reserves, and then value and then refinery capacity. So these are just stats and statistics for you to know more about what Nigeria has to offer to Singaporean businessmen and companies looking to do business in that sector. Then Ghana discovered oil in 2011, and so far it has also become a key or critical player on the African continent when it comes to oil and gas, with a lot of gas projects being installed at the moment. So here you also find stats and figures looking at the crude oil reserves of the country, as well as the natural gas reserves, as well as the value of its petroleum exports, as well as some bits or tidbits about the oil and gas industry here. So Nigeria and Ghana, we've put them on the spotlight. Which projects are we excited about? We talk of the Dupont Energy Park, which commenced in 2021 in Nigeria, and then the EPC contractor being Dupont. Another interesting one is the 10 drilling campaign, which began in 2021 with United Shine EPC Consortium being the EPC contractor. We also have the Bonga South West Apparel Oil Project in Nigeria, which commenced in 2020. And then we also have the Western Corridor Gas Project. So we can see that on the West African coast, there are a number of project opportunities for companies, from the provision of gas to liquid technology to provision of ancillary more or less towards tank farms, as well as storage facilities for gas products and then liquefied products. Then we also see of technical service contracts also being awarded. So this is a good time to look at the West African coast, and then to look at Ghana and then Nigeria being the giant here, to be able to see what opportunities are available. But these are some of the opportunities that you'll be able to acquire when you decide to set your sights on the West African region. So we cannot talk about oil and gas in Africa without talking about Angola. And with this, we have some stats for you to look through when it comes to its proven crude oil reserves, all the way to its refinery capacity. So as an OPEC member, Angola is a key country when it comes to oil and gas, and then they are leaders when it comes to certain trends when it comes to major investments in this area. Then we wanted to also present to you Namibia, which we will say is a new kid on the block. Namibia is tipped to produce over 500,000 barrels of crude per year. And then this is quite an exciting moment for the country and then for Africa as a whole. Which projects are we excited to present to you? We have the QMN gas project from Angola, with the EPC contractor being Saipem. Then we also have Sonangol refineries. This was awarded in 2022 with the EPC contractor being KT Kinetics. Then we have the Venute light oil discovery from Namibia, which is supposed to be a deep well drilling projects off the coast of Namibia. And then there are so many opportunities inherent in the South African sphere for the oil and gas industry. So we have exploration and then production equipment, especially for, you can think around Namibia and then their new oil production discovery. Then we have environmental, that's EP, protection and monitoring technologies. Then we also have opportunities for seismic data reporting and releasing. So there are a number of opportunities depending on which portion of the oil and gas industry you are into. This is a very good opportunity for you to go into the oil and gas industry in Africa. So this section of my presentation will look more towards doing business in Africa. So having a good local collaborator, having good market insight as well as knowledge, and then intelligence is key to entering the oil and gas sector in Africa and in any sector in Africa. So I'm going to tell you what not to do when you are looking to go into oil and gas or looking to do business here in Africa. Don't choose a wrong partner. When you choose the wrong partner, they will lead you astray and then basically make your business entry and then your plans go haywire. So one of the key advice I usually give to companies is look at the partner, undertake your due diligence, make sure that the partner fits in terms of their vision and everything fits into what you are looking to achieve on the continent, your business strategy, and then their vision and mission also aligns with what you are looking to do. The partner is local, they understand the market dynamics, and then they speak the same language in terms of the business language of the country. And in case of anything, they can become your troubleshooter on the ground. Another point I wanted to bring to your attention is don't burn bridges with regulators or key stakeholders on the ground. Here, we are more, I'm talking more towards one key example being Shell PLC and then the myriad of problems they have had so far in Nigeria when it comes to oil spills. And then, I mean, there's a legal action against them and a whole lot. So when doing business on the continent, make sure that you are good with every stakeholder from your customers all the way to regulatory bodies, and then make sure that anything that has got to do with local content laws or any regulatory policy that has been put in place by the country, you adhere to it, and then you follow it to be able to become successful on the continent. Then we are also having issues of companies usually trying to impose standards on emerging markets, and that is usually a recipe for disaster. There is the need to understand local market dynamics, to understand what key players, key stakeholders you should be able to talk to make sure that at least your product or your service is accepted on the ground. Don't just assume that this is something that has been adopted the world over, especially in Europe or in the Western world. So you think it is easier for you to transplant it into Africa without making the effort to localize it. And this, as I said earlier, is a recipe for disaster. Just know that in case it's an industry that you want locals to be able to adopt and then use, or to be able to fall upon your technology or solution or know-how to be able to undertake it, you will need to customize it a bit. Even if it is like an engineering solution you are providing, you will need to customize it to fit the local situation. So don't impose foreign standards on local markets or emerging markets without doing your part of the job to understand what the market needs. Then I will want to end this session of doing business in Africa is listen to your local collaborators, undertake market research. If it means paying regular visits, Africa is another area whereby you cannot just do business remotely. You will need to go and meet people physically, undertake some handshakes to be able to provide or to be able to acquire businesses and to get stakeholders on your side. So on the ground advice from Africans, listen to them. They know they are in that continent, they are in that situation, they are in that country, and then they know what is happening. So if they advise you or they are giving you advice, listen to what they say and incorporate their suggestions in whatever business area you are looking to enter. So just following up on that, I would like to take this slide to talk more about doing business in Africa, a case study for an oil in water and water in oil monitoring device manufacturer that was looking to enter into the market. They already had a representative in South Africa, but then it was very difficult for them to cover other areas of the continent. They noticed West Africa's oil and gas industry was conducive for them, since they have been getting sporadic procurement requests from West Africa. They felt, okay, this is it for us. We want to enter into West Africa. How do we go about it? Which country do we focus on? And then how do we get our brand presence in there? So they contacted us at Amena Africa, and then what we did was to evaluate the local market environment on the client's behalf based on the parameters we set with the clients, and then the solutions and the devices they wanted to enter into the market with. We identified and then evaluated a number of prospective distributors. So these companies were spread across the marine sector, the oil and gas, analytical instruments, industry, and a whole lot. One interesting thing about Africa is that we do not have a lot of companies undertaking sector specialization. You'll find a lot of companies, especially when it comes to distribution, becoming a one-stop shop for a number of companies, and then taken on a number of brands and representative brands. So exclusivity sometimes doesn't work. So we had to take that into consideration and then search for that ideal partner or partners for this company. And then we facilitated the local partner introduction based on the sector expertise of each distributor that we shortlisted. Then we provided the entry strategy recommendation for this company. The results, the client adopted a three-way entry strategy to West Africa with distributors in the marine sector, oil and gas, and then analytical instrument sector, covering different areas of their device and then solutions that they had for the market. Clients gave us a feedback that they have had a 50% increase in terms of verified procurement requests, and then now they are supplying to their distributors to be able to provide their devices on the market. So these are some of the intricacies that will go in, especially if you're a device or machinery or equipment manufacturer that is looking to do business on the continent. Thank you, everybody, for this session. And then in case you will want to contact us, you can give Amena Africa a call, and then we can see what your market needs are. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much, Joyce. I'd like to invite Nakba and also Mr. Oladayo to maybe give a brief introduction of your respective companies, and also maybe some of the examples of the types of projects that your companies are undertaking in the African continent, for our audience's kind of background understanding, so that they kind of get a context for the panel discussion that we're going to continue. So maybe we'll start with Nakba and then followed by Mr. Oladayo.
Thank you, Wendy. My name is Ngaba Putwa. I'm the CEO of Mendi Energy Resources. Mendi Energy Resources is a Cape Town headquartered company with a regional focus of Southern Africa. What we do on the electricity front, is that we facilitate the development of solar PV and waste to energy projects across the Southern Africa region. We also are into waste to energy projects, particularly working with municipalities who are the owners of the waste, and looking at ways in which that resource can be converted into electricity. We are also currently in the process of securing a dealership for energy storage solutions, basically lithium batteries and so forth, for the South African market. In the oil and gas sector, we trade in energy commodities such as refined products and coal. We are also currently in the process of looking to find technology and investment partners for a machine shop that would manufacture tools and parts to service the oil and gas sector from the southeast coast of South Africa, including Mozambique, and all the way up to the west coast, all the way to Ghana. So that's currently the project that we are involved in. Thank you.
Mr. Oladayo, please. I don't think we can hear you. I'm not sure if you're on mute. Are you able to turn on your microphone, or? Yeah, we can't hear you, Mr. Arvalu. Okay, so now we can hear you now.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, we can hear you now. You might have to start your introduction again.
Okay. Apologies to everyone. So I'm Oladayo Orolu. I'm Head of Business Development for Siemens Energy in Nigeria, and also managing government affairs function. At Siemens Energy, we are a global powerhouse and original equipment manufacturer. In Nigeria and Africa, we are largely involved in gas services, which covers manufacture and supply of power generation equipment. Also for oil and gas, the small gas turbines, the compressors, all reciprocating equipment. In Nigeria, we have a service center where we support the oil and gas sector with minor repairs of some of the equipment, which keeps the sector going. We also have field service engineers, field service representatives who are specially trained and certified by Siemens Energy that support the industry, not just in Nigeria, across the entire African sphere. Also in Nigeria, we are responsible for the Azura Power Project, a 459 megawatt, which is the first project financed IPP in Nigeria. We are currently also supporting the Nigerian government with the Presidential Power Initiative, which is to resolve the challenges in the grid, in the power grid, thereby making power available to Nigerians. In Egypt, a few years ago, we also worked with the Egyptian government to deliver 18 gigawatts of power, ranging from 14 gigawatts of gas-fired with additional 4 gigawatts of wind power. So we are available to support Singaporean businesses in Nigeria or in Africa with our solutions, with our collaborative efforts. Okay, thank you.
No, thank you for the brief introduction, Oladayo and Nakba. So what we could do now is we'll just proceed with the panel discussion. So Mr. Pedro Socco, unfortunately, he told me that he has something urgent to attend to, so he's unable to join us today. But to get the ball rolling, maybe what we can do is to let me start with some questions to kick off the discussion for our panelists. The first set of questions I'm just thinking is pertaining to how Africa's energy sector is transforming in the face of rising fuel prices and also with the global transition towards green energy gaining momentum. So basically we have witnessed in recent years sharp increases in the oil and gas prices, partly due to rising demand as global economic activities kind of recover from the dampening effects of COVID-19 pandemic, and partly also due to the Russian-Ukraine crisis in Europe. So for the panelists, could I just kind of get your views? Like, do you foresee like the high oil prices to kind of stay in the current elevated level for the immediate and medium term? And if so, what are some of the prospects for Africa's oil and gas sector to expand its capacity to take advantage of the higher energy prices? So maybe I'll start with Joyce, and then basically then Nakba and Mr. Oladayo. Joyce, can you hear us? I think you're on mute. Yeah, you need to unmute the WhatsApp.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, so we can hear you now.
All right, so as before that, I was saying that in my opinion, well, with the current Eastern European situation, yes, I do foresee high oil prices coming up on the current international scene. And then this is also a very good opportunity for Africa to position itself as the next frontier of what supply when it comes to oil and gas for international markets. So I do see prospects coming out of this current situation for in terms of this challenge. Thank you very much.
So maybe I'll put the same question to Nakba.
Thank you, Wen-Ying. I think the oil price situation, is a difficult one because there's many factors that impact on that price. We know that OPEC is meeting on Wednesday, and they may introduce output cuts of about 1 million barrels per day to stop the price from going down. So I think it's a very artificially managed price. However, I think the problem with price in Africa is that low or high, there's a focus on just increasing volumes of production. Whereas I think that there's opportunities in introducing efficiencies in those processes of production. And I think there's a lot that can be gained there in terms of, for example, ensuring that there's reduction of waste, there's a reduction of costs in that process. So I think there's opportunity to look at the production systems and processes that are undertaken to see whether efficiencies can be introduced in that. Because I think what tends to happen is that we tend to just produce more and more oil because we want the revenue to come in, but we're not looking at how efficient the deficiencies in the weaknesses in the process that we produce.
Okay, I think it sounds like a good segue to what Siemens Energy is also doing. So maybe I'll just get like a couple of points from Oladayo.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with the two previous speakers. I also see that the elevated prices will remain for a while. The political situations in Europe, the situation in Iran, and also the slow recovery from COVID. This will continue to put pressure on supply chain within the oil sector. Also, further to what Naba said, the opportunity is there for Africa to grow, to improve on efficiency of production, even the quality of the output itself. For instance, in Nigeria, Nigeria is not even able to meet the OPEC production quota because of energy theft, because of lack of additional new investment in production, in exploration activities. So there is still that opportunity for Nigeria to do more, to first of all meet the quota, by OPEC, and to be able to supply more in terms of either gas or the crude oil itself or the accompanying the byproduct. So that opportunity, it's there for Nigeria, for Africa, to make more investments, to do more of R&D, to improve on the quality of the output, the efficiency of the production process, and overall add more value to the oil and gas sector.
Yeah, thank you very much, all three. Yeah. So the other thing then will be some of the new energies that are coming up. So because we're seeing that the world is increasingly taking climate change and also green energy increasingly more seriously. So basically, in your views, do you see any impact on the demand for traditional oil and gas? And also, like, how might then Africa's oil and gas producing countries and companies kind of respond to the challenge where more and more of the oil and gas importing countries shifting and maybe making some green transition? How can they evolve in order to remain relevant in the global energy market? So maybe I'll just get the Nakbat and Oladayo to kind of like take this one first.
Thank you. I mean, I think the way I see it, the oil and gas sector in the continent is probably going to stay for some time because there isn't a lot of innovation that is currently introduced in terms of the transition forward, if you look at the industry broadly. In South Africa, for example, the market that I know better, the car manufacturing companies, they determine the fuel standards because they produce the engines and decide what fuel that engine is going to use. And in the South African market, the new car market is quite robust. And these cars are coming with new engines that require sustainable fuel, blended fuels, and so forth. And one of the challenges that we are experiencing in South Africa is that the refineries that we have are not producing blended fuels. Some have had to close because the government has set a deadline by which these refineries need to transform so they're able to produce blended fuels. So the refineries themselves are not adjusting enough to this change. And I think there are opportunities in the refining sector in general, because the continent does not, basically, majority of its refined product demand is imported. And I think there's therefore an opportunity for refining to happen within the continent. And I think once there's that demand, the refineries are able to procure crude oil from the continent and are able to refine it in such a way in which sustainable fuels can come out of that. Then the industry has a long life ahead.
Wayne, you're on mute. I can't hear you.
So I'm going to pass that same question to Mr. Oladayo, and then maybe Joyce to chime in then after.
Thank you. Just in addition to the points by Naba, I think the change or the transition is already happening. For instance, in Nigeria, Total, that used to be Total Oil and Gas, they are now known as Total Energies. And they also now have a venture business, which is looking at investing in renewable energy. Just last week, Shell announced the acquisition of Daystar Power in Nigeria. So Daystar Power is probably the leading renewable energy provider in Nigeria now. Shell has invested in that. So they are now trying to increase their portfolio within the renewable energy space. And right now, for us at Siemens Energy, we're also having this conversation with a lot of the IOCs and the NOCs towards decarbonization of their existing processes, optimization of the existing assets and processes to see how much of reduction, how much of savings can be achieved in terms of their energy requirement. And so I see that transition, taking off already. But of course, we in Africa, we are in this dilemma. In one of the slides that Joyce presented, I saw that about 500 million Africans, they don't even have access to electricity. In Nigeria, a nation of about 200 million people, access to electricity is 65% in the urban areas. Okay, our grid capacity is with less than 10,000 megawatts. So how do we move from 10,000 megawatts to meeting, to achieving self-sufficiency in electricity supply with renewable energy? That's a dilemma. I don't see that happening immediately. So Nigeria has also set up their own, the net zero target, which is 2060, but then using gas as a transition fuel. So the supply of gas, production of gas, oil and gas will still remain for a while we develop new technologies to now bring in this renewable energy to see how we can decarbonize, how we can manage that transition without necessarily increasing the net carbon emissions. So that will be the focus for Nigeria and I assume for Africa. But in terms of starting the conversation, the transition, that is happening already. In Nigeria now, there are several projects under development looking at hydrogen production, either blue hydrogen or green hydrogen or pink hydrogen or purple hydrogen, whatever form it is. Those conversations are beginning to take shape. So I think the transition has started, and oil and gas companies are also not lagging behind in these conversations. Thank you.
Okay, so maybe I get Choice to maybe chime in.
Said everything I wanted to say, but then I'm also of the opinion that the transition has begun. Total Energies and then ENI and then some other big majors are already incorporating renewable energies in their current production and as well as operations. I think Total Energies has between the last 5 years invested about 60 million in renewables fully in the continent. And then we have, I think, about 150 megawatts already installed on the continent. And these are more or less some of their strategies to be able to reduce their carbon footprint on the continent. As Mr. Orulu already mentioned, some of these production or more oil and gas production companies are also looking to decarbonize. So the transition is ongoing. We are seeing a different change in the wind. This is something that is coming to stay, and it is all about sustainability and then producing in a manner that will make future business sustainable in the long run. So yes, everything the other two panelists have said is true. And then we see a lot of countries more or less like putting in place or starting the conversation is changing, and they are looking to put in place some of these strategies in their national development plans.
Right. Actually, yeah. So, I mean, from what I gathered that for Africa, so it's actually for renewable energy. Not only does Africa actually have a large potential for wind, solar, hydro, and even geothermal energy, but there's also deposits of minerals as well as rare earths, which are actually essential for the production of from electric batteries, wind turbines, etc. So in this case, I mean, it sounds like the prospect for the renewable energy sector in Africa is really bright. But at this stage, what do you think is the possibility for Africa becoming a kind of exporter of renewable energies, and what kind of policies or what kind of changes do you think would be beneficial to help Africa kind of unlock its full potential to really lead become a leader in renewable energy sectors? Maybe I can start with Mr. Orolu, and then for Nagba and then Joyce.
Thank you. You're absolutely spot on. There's a lot of minerals, resources available in Africa, which will really help, the production of more energy and renewable energy power. I would take, for instance, lithium, which is used in the production of the batteries required for electric vehicles, and also even the storage solutions for power generation. That is in abundance in Nigeria, for instance. And you see foreign companies, including Tesla, now asking for licenses in Nigeria to produce, to mine lithium. But what the Nigerian government has rightly done, which I also encourage other African countries to do, is to ask Tesla to set up in Nigeria to produce those batteries. So rather than taking lithium away from Nigeria or from Africa to now process in Europe or in America, then you bring it back to Africa, it's not going to help Africa. So what is going to help Africa is to localize some of these technologies, some of these production processes. And if you look at the carbon emission footprint in Africa, maritime accounts for greater than half of that, because you have raw materials produced in Africa, you ship them to Europe, to Asia, then you bring them back, you bring the refined product back to Africa. So when you look at that double movement, it adds a lot to carbon emissions in Africa. So the way forward for Africa is to localize these solutions, these processes, these production activities. And how can they do it? Africa, we don't have that capacity in terms of the technical know-how, even the financing to make that happen. So this, presents opportunities for international development partners, for international organizations to look inward, to look in Africa, in Nigeria, in Angola, in South Africa, to see how much of these activities can be localized. And that is the only way Africa can be positioned as a global house, as a global powerhouse in sustainable energy production for the future. Not just exporting solar power or exporting hydrogen, of course, that opportunity is also there. Production of hydrogen from natural gas, thereby exporting it, green ammonia, blue ammonia. These are products that will be required for the future energy systems that can come out of Africa. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Arolo. So now next week we can have Kanaka and then Joyce to chime in on the same question. At the same time, I also like to throw in another idea, which is about the African Continental Free Trade Area, which was signed up earlier this year, and whether that is also and maybe your views on whether that could also help in developing what Mr. Arolo was saying, which is for more of the industries to actually be localized on the African continent. Maybe I invite Ms. Nakpa and then Joyce, and then Mr. Arolo, if you want to chime in on this extra spice that I've kind of like put in just now, please do as well.
Yes, I think that Africa has to be seen as a market. There is demand in Africa for energy products, whether it's liquid fuels or electricity. The continent needs these energy sources for its economies to develop, for its people to develop. And I think historically, the extraction, I think in one of the slides that Joyce put up, there's a lot of emphasis in the oil and gas sector for the extraction aspects of this sector, whereas there are benefits up and down the value chain. And I think we need to look at the oil and gas and energy sector broadly in Africa as an area as areas into which to invest for the local market to begin with. We know that the projected population growth of the continent is going to surpass China. I'm not sure that's 2050 or 2030. So we know that this is going to be a huge market. So I think that investors from Singapore companies, whether it's engineering companies, technological companies from Singapore, need to think of Africa as a market into which they can grow, extend their services, extend their products, etc. Partner with African businesses as equals to develop those markets. You hear European companies, we speak of Shell, we speak of Total in the renewable energy sector. In South Africa, the solar power and energy generation, wind power generation sector is fairly developed. The dominant players are European companies. Not even China is a participant there. Companies from Asia broadly are absent. And one has to, when we're speaking to an audience that we have here today, we have to say, look, when we look at Africa as a market, as an investment destination, what do we see? How do we understand that environment? And what is our objective? The objective has to be long-term. There's money to be made in the long term. It's not a 100-meter sprint. It's a marathon. And you are able to see the continent and that market as a potential growth point. And I think that's really where we should be focusing. The point that the localization point that Oladayo is talking about is a very important point. Thank you.
Yeah, so maybe I'll get Joyce to also give her views on that question. And basically, Nagba, you made a really good point, and then we'll touch on that as well, on how best, what your comments are on getting Singapore companies to work with maybe African companies. So maybe what services and expertise Africa will require from the world, including Singapore. You mentioned that just now, some of it, and then basically, what do African companies look out for when seeking potential partners to work with for their ventures? So I think I can let Joyce continue on with her views on the earlier questions, and then also to carry on her views on how best Singapore companies and African companies could probably work together and partner and explore the new markets.
All right, thank you very much for that question. In my view, the AFTA framework that has come into being is to create a single free trade area in Africa. That means trading without restrictions, trading without any impediments, and that we are all under one Africa. Well, it has gone into the framework agreement has gone into it is ongoing, and basically we have success stories of let's say Kenyan companies exporting to Ghana, and then Ghanaian companies exporting to South Africa. When we talk about the energy sector, I see it more in terms of cross-regional collaboration, and then pulling together resources in terms of investments to be able to take up some of these opportunities. So let's say we are looking at West Africa. We talk about the transition to gas. Is there the possibility for different, let's say, private sector companies as well as governments to come together, pool resources together to put, let's say, investments into the transportation and the refining of gas to be able to power the needs of their various economies? This is one point I will also look at it. Let's say I'm a company in South Africa, and then I want to produce and then export rechargeable batteries across the continent. We have a lot of tariffs and non-tariffs impediments to Africa's trade as we have it. So this AFTA is looking to be able to make sure that the playing ground is level and fair to everybody. In terms of in terms of the impact of this for Singaporean companies, now it means whatever tariffs and the non-tariffs impediments that were there for you to be able to participate in this oil and gas or energy sector in Africa, it has been removed by this framework. So it means companies can come onto the continent, set up, demonstrate that at least a portion or a significant portion of my production or operations are localized. So I can be able to enjoy certain tariff and the non-tariff exemptions under the AFTA. So I see this in the short to medium term going in terms of cross-regional collaboration, investment attraction, trying to localize and make sure that technologies and then technical skills and know-how is brought onto the continent. And then for companies to be able to take up these opportunities and then enter more markets than previously would have been in this current dispensation. So I believe AFTA has come for good. It is there to help companies be able to enter into markets, do business without any impediments, and then to give opportunities for both small, not just multinational companies, to take up opportunities that are emerging or are hidden, and then to be able to help them to grow and then to expand. So the opportunities that are there, a lot of them, and then it would be quite an interesting one to see more Singaporean companies taking up the opportunities in the various both upstream and then downstream sectors that the oil and gas industry has to offer. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of emphasis on know-how and expertise, which I think there's quite a number of Singapore companies that have a lot of experience in working in oil and gas sector, and also starting to move into the renewable space. So so maybe I can let Mr. Arolo take the last wrap up. Also because you're from Siemens, so how do you like how Singapore companies could perhaps even partner a company like Siemens who's already in Africa? What kind of things would you be looking out for? And how do you think it might work for potentially for Singapore companies to partner with Africans or even African companies, or even like MNCs who are already in Africa, to jointly to work on the growth markets in Africa? Mr. Arolo.
Thank you. I mean, absolutely. Just to take it from where Joyce left, let me give an example of the collaborative efforts amongst African nations. For instance, the Nigeria-Morocco gas pipeline project, which is proposed 6,000 kilometer of pipeline, taking gas from Nigeria through the Atlantic Ocean, supplying countries who are along that coastal line, to take it to Morocco, then for onward supply to Europe. That is an example, and this is also an opportunity for EPCs in Singapore, for instance. I mean, one requirement, or let me say two key requirements for infrastructure development in Africa, or let me say Nigeria, is getting the right technology in terms of the solution and competitive, affordable financing. Okay, I'm not sure of many African countries that can sufficiently finance their own infrastructure development, which is also the gap that the Chinese entities that they see, and they are trying to plug in, bringing financing and the technology, maybe not so suitable technology, I'm sorry to say. But again, this is also where Singapore can play a key role. EPC companies in Singapore, for instance, partnering with Siemens Energy. We have a strong establishment in Singapore. So Siemens Energy in Singapore plus EPC firms in Singapore coming to work with Siemens Energy in Nigeria, looking at, for instance, LNG solutions. The Nigerian energy they're developing the opportunity for more LNG investment in Nigeria, and several other opportunities. So affordable and competitive financing, it's a good way to come into the African market. And there can also be a lot of lessons to share in terms of the fiscal and regulatory environment. So Singapore organizations or firms can also bring their own knowledge. How did they resolve there are a lot of fiscal issues in Africa, a lot of fiscal issues delaying project development in Nigeria, for instance. I mean, market I'm very conversant with. So there can also be a lot of policy formulation, policy support, advisory that EPC or organizations in Singapore can bring into Nigeria to unlock investment opportunities and also for them to participate. Then we talk about decarbonization, which is a key part of the energy transition. Are there solutions which have worked in Singapore that can be localized in Nigeria or in Africa? Okay, which Singapore EPC or OEMs can also bring into this environment. So for us at Siemens Energy, we have the right solutions, we have the right technology. Sometimes we don't have all the solutions, but we have a co-creation mindset whereby we can work with firms from Singapore or EPC, either EPCs or OEMs, to develop, to co-create the suitable solutions for specific problems, either on decarbonization or hydrogen production, or lithium battery production, or solar power, or wind power, or gas-fired power, whichever it is. So these opportunities are, there in Africa for Singapore organizations to come in, invest, localize that technology, localize the know-how. We're also having shortage of human capital. A lot of our key resources in Nigeria now, they are migrating to Europe, migrating to Canada, migrating to Australia. So there's a gap already. And this is also where, Singaporean companies can plug in, bring their expertise to Nigeria, either remotely or on-site, develop additional capacity, help us to plug in those loopholes and to develop the continent. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, that sounds really very promising. But I think because in the interest of time, we might have to cut short this very interesting discussion with our industry experts dialing in from Africa and also Singapore. With this, what I'll say is, ladies and gentlemen, so we have come to the end of our session today. And I hope that this webinar has provided you with useful information and inspire you to kind of explore the markets of the African continent. Feel free to contact me if you want to get in touch with any of our speakers for further discussion. At the same time, I also like to kind of highlight that there will be several, there'll still be upcoming festivals, so as shown in the screen. So if you're interested, please scan the QR code provided on the slide to register or contact us for more information. On Africa, we also have another webinar coming in on the 17th of October on consumer goods. And I think there's also a partner activity from ESG. They'll be conducting a mission to Ghana sometime in November. So please feel free to email us if you want more information on these upcoming activities. So without further ado, on behalf of Singapore Business Federation, I would like to thank you, our audience, and also our partners and speaking organizations for spending the afternoon with us. For them, it's the morning. We look forward to seeing you at our next festival webinar in Africa. Thank you very much.